Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 1 discussion. Welcome to day 12 of Teaser season for patch 3.26 and the upcoming Secrets of the Atlas expansion. Today was, of course, the big day. We got the high-level features overview. We also got, most importantly, the patch notes. Now, I have done a deep dive live stream into these patch notes. That is something that's available on YouTube. I'll link to it down in the description below. At some point over the next few days, I might do a more condensed version of the patch notes, but that would be a fairly large work on my part. It's not something that I can do in the next 12 or 24 hours. So what I wanted to do today is instead take a look at the builds that were most successful and most popular during the Settlers League and have a look and see which ones survive the Secrets of the Atlas expansion, which ones of them take small nerfs like Righteous Fire did, which ones take substantial nerfs but still fundamentally survive like Siphon Mines, and which of them end up being completely and utterly gutted like Hexblast Mines. Now, it is worth noting that if you looked at the Secrets of the Atlas patch notes the instant they went up, the Hexblast changes were not in them. They were added after the fact. So they were clearly missed. They were added in an hour or two later. Additionally, there are some things that are still to come when it comes to the Secrets of the Atlas patch notes. One thing is the Scarab changes. Scarab changes have a huge impact on the farming meta, so just keep that one in mind. And also there are plans to make some further changes to the passive tree to empower cold damage spellcasting. So exact details of that are not very clear. I'm assuming that this is intended to buff it, but we'll find out exact details there. Okay, so let's have a look at what the top performing builds were early in the Settlers expansion. So this is 3.25, reasonably early on. This is POE Ninja's aggregation of data. And you'll see that the most popular build early on was Nova of Frostbolt Hierophant. Now, anyone that is playing that combination of skill and ascendancy was playing with Archmage support. Archmage support is getting nerfed. This nerf on its own is pretty moderate. There is also a massive nerf, however, to Nova of Frostbolts. And there is also a modest nerf to the Hierophant's ability to recover mana. All in all, I think this build survives, but it doesn't use the same skill anymore. This build is simply going to change to use Ball Lightning of Orbiting instead. Ball Lightning of Orbiting was a little bit worse than Nova of Frostbolts, and as a result, not many people played with it, but it was almost as good. It did the job. It's going to be worse in 326 than it was in 325, but it was so good that I think it's going to just do fine anyway. Second most popular build was Righteous Fire played on the Chieftain. Now, Fire Trap is taking a slight nerf to the amount of damage that it does, but that's not the reason you're playing Righteous Fire or the Chieftain. The reason you're playing this is because you love to have chain reaction, explosion, ignites. Those are not going anywhere. So let's talk the numbers on this one, shall we? Fire Trap is getting nerfed, only the ground dot component though. So Fire Trap has two components that it deals directly just on the gem itself. There is an initial fire-based hit that the Fire Trap causes when it explodes, and then on top of that there is the bad ground that it leaves. However, in the context of the builds that are going to be playing Fire Trap, i.e. Righteous Fire builds, the key thing that it does is actually the initial fire hit damage has the capacity to ignite, and that ignite has the capacity to spread like wildfire throughout packs, especially if you're using some mixture of endgame ignite proliferation sources. Here, I'm not really talking about ignite proliferation support the gem. You can do better than this. You can use Beric's Respite, or alternately get the same mod off the Goat Boots. You can also get mods on your Eldritch Gloves. The Searing Exarch Influence pool has a mod that allows your ignites to propagate even better. Or additionally, there's a couple of other sources of that. There's a Cluster Jewel, number of other things. So basically, you're propagating ignites throughout entire packs, and that includes the initial explosion of Fire Trap. So your plan B gets worse. Your plan B is the dot ground. That's not really that important though, because you're doing all sorts of other things. You've got Righteous Fire there, you've got the ignite component of Fire Trap. Ultimately, there's a very minor nerf. The build's still fine. It still has the same strengths it used to have. It still has the same weaknesses it used to have. It's still very playable. Play it if you love the playstyle. Play it if your Atlas is set up in such a way that you want to run content that Righteous Fire is good at. In particular, play this if you're wanting to do a day one push to Rogue Expedition content. Lightning Strike comes up next. Now, here we've got Lightning Strike on the Slayer as a thing that comes up first. Later on, people worked out the Trickster was better. The reason that POE Ninja has the Slayer as the higher of the two is because early on, the Slayer performed better before people worked out recombination, before people worked out how to craft necrotic armors effectively. Lightning Strike on the Slayer. What's changing? Lightning Strike, the skill gem, is getting nerfed. The projectile component of it is going to have 50% less damage. The actual original hit is going to stay the same. Var Lightning Strike itself, that's losing some damage. And on top of that, returning projectile support, if you were using it, and it was a popular choice to use, that is also losing some damage. But the real change that's taking place to the Lightning Strike Slayer, which is all sounding fine so far, is that its absolute must-use boots, Ralakesh's Impatience, are also going to take a substantial nerf in this patch. So let's bring up Ralakesh's Impatience in the patch notes so you can see this. This is a thoroughgoing rework. Ralakesh's Impatience unique boots now have one of the following: counters having maximum number of endurance charges, counters having maximum number of frenzy charges, or counters having maximum number of power charges. They now also have some percentage amount of movement speed and also have immunity to corrupted blood. Existing versions of this unique are unaffected by these changes. So Ralakesh's Impatience is getting a pretty significant suite of nerfs here, and it no longer synergizes as well with what the Slayer builds were trying to do. So those builds that are based around the Slayer and a Lightning Strike, they're going to probably survive this, but they're going to survive it in a different form. Lightning Strike is going to survive the patch notes, but Lightning Strike builds as you know them are not going to be recognizable anymore. And that's actually going to go double, triple, quadruple when we get down to the Trickster in a sec. Next was Molten Strike of the Zenith. Molten Strike of the Zenith is kind of funny. This skill is getting nerfed in every imaginable way. 60% less damage on the projectile component. The damage that's dealt by every 5th strike is also getting a substantial numerical nerf. So you look at this and then you think, oh, we're losing the Kelgar and runesmithing enchant. Surely this skill's got to be dead, 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 right? No, it kind of isn't. The thing is that it was so good that losing a bunch of damage doesn't really gut the skill at all. This is a skill that was able to do, at least once you got to the point that you had enough attack speed, that you weren't finding that you were dying all the time before you got your big 5th strike off. This is dealing absolutely ludicrous amounts of damage, and it turns out that when you bring down the amount of damage that a skill that's doing ludicrous damage does to the point that it's only doing amazing damage, it's still doing amazing damage. It's still Molten Strike of the Zenith. It's still got the problems where it's only targeting a small component of the screen, and as a result, it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. However, if you genuinely like the playstyle, this skill is still going to remain good. In 5th position, we have the Lightning Strike Trickster. Lightning Strike survives. Trickster survives. Lightning Strike and Trickster together survive, probably. What doesn't survive these patch notes is the precise ways that people played a Lightning Strike Trickster. So let's bring up Lightning Strike Trickster in Settlers League. What's the primary weapon they're using? Oh look, 77% of people are using Ephemeral Edge. Now, Ephemeral Edge is one of those things where a whole bunch of different things multiply together to make this really good. Ephemeral Edge has a text: attacks with this weapon have added maximum lightning damage equal to 20% of players' maximum energy shield. So the number 20 is getting nerfed down to, I believe it's 10 to 15%. And so that's going to be a substantial nerf to the damage that Ephemeral Edge does. So once you've got Ephemeral Edge, you feel like Voice of the Storm becomes somewhat of a lock-in. You kind of have to use this. Voice of the Storm causes lightning damage with non-critical strikes to be lucky, which means that you want to then just remove your potential to inflict critical strikes, and then you want to just benefit from the fact that your damage is lucky. That means volatility support becomes really good. The build sort of builds itself once you accept that you're going to be playing a Trickster and you're going to be using Ephemeral Edge. However, remove the option of Ephemeral Edge, or at least remove the decision to use Ephemeral Edge, and suddenly everything else starts to change. You could instead set up things entirely differently. So let's have a look at what people who chose not to use Ephemeral Edge ended up doing. Let's have a look at this, and you'll see that instead here, what are people using in their amulet slot? Oh look, often people are using Yoke of Suffering instead, something that's totally different. People are going crit using Merylyn's Fallacy sometimes. Other people are using Carnage Heart, Replica Badge of the Brotherhood, even the Utmost, or in many cases a rare amulet. So there are other ways to build a Trickster Lightning Strike character, and ultimately it's going to be those other ways that are going to survive as we look forward into patch 3.26. Now, there was a private league that was run a couple of months ago by Pox. This was the biggest private league that's been run during the entirety of Settlers League. It was the one that forced Grinding Gear Games to increase the cap from 20,000 players to 30,000 players. So it was absolutely massive. Anyways, these are the players who reached level 90 or higher in that league. Now, because of Pox's knowledge and familiarity with the RF Chieftain setup, you'll find a lot of people elected to play RF Chieftain in this that might not otherwise have done so. They're like, oh, okay, I'm joining Pox's league, I've got to play Pox's build. So for that reason, I'm just going to work under the assumption that Chieftain is overrepresented here. Plus, we've already kind of discussed the Chieftain Ascendancy a bit as well. The most popular skill to use was Power Siphon. Now, Power Siphon is primarily used in conjunction with Locus Mines support. As you'll see here, when we have a look here, 97% of people who are using Power Siphon in this event were using Mines as a delivery mechanism for it. What is happening to Power Siphon Mines? Well, this one is interesting in that Power Siphon is getting a little bit of a nerf, but it's a very carefully done nerf in such a way that it is doubly, triply, quadruply devastating to Locus Mine builds. Effectiveness of added damage is being nerfed from 159% at gem level 20 down to 105%. Ouch, that's a huge loss. That's like 35% less damage. And it now has an attack speed of 150% of base, previously 115%. This is something like a 25% more multiplier to the attack speed that Power Siphon has. So, imagine two different characters that are playing Power Siphon. One of them is going direct attack with Power Siphon and a wand, and they're just sitting there going bang, 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 bang. That player is losing a small amount of damage, but not very much. That's because they're getting 25% more attack speed and roughly 35% less damage. Rolling all of that together, yes, they're in a worse position than they were, but it's not absolutely crushing. However, if you are not playing direct attack, if you're instead playing mines, your mine throwing speed is still the same. So the amount of damage that you can put out has suffered from the entirety of this damage drop, but at the same time, you are not receiving any meaningful compensation in the form of faster attack speed. Yes, your mines do attack faster, but you're not limited by that in your damage output. You're limited instead by the ability to throw those mines in the first place, and that is not getting 25% faster. Considering all of this, Power Siphon Mines is getting a big nerf. However, it was so far above the power curve for leveling early in progression that actually it might end up still being completely fine. There are a couple of other changes that need to be mentioned when it comes to this as well. And that is what's happening when we have a look at wands. Now, there are a number of changes to rolling items. Firstly, let's talk about the thing that is less important, but that is unambiguously a buff. Resistance modifiers can no longer roll or be crafted onto weapons. Synthesis implicit resistance modifiers no longer roll on weapons. Resistance modifiers are no longer going to be clogging up the pool of all the mods that you can get on your wands. However, we have this line. Scepters, staves, rune daggers, and wands now roll attack modifiers less often. Wands require really, really, really weird combinations of stats that are on them, especially for Power Siphon. Power Siphon wants to have percentage spell damage on it, but at the same time as having percentage spell damage, you also want flat lightning damage to attacks. Now, recombination does provide a solution to this. We'll talk recombination in a sec because it also applies to what we were saying earlier about the Trickster. But it is worth saying that Power Siphon oriented wands are going to be harder to roll as a result of this combination of changes. Now, what do I think about the build overall though? I think that it absolutely does survive this because it was just so overwhelmingly powerful before, at least early in the game when it excelled. It's actually not something that's particularly good once you get to tier 17 maps, but until that point, it is absolutely phenomenal. Okay, so we have Lightning Strike next, and you'll see how much more dominant the Trickster Ascendancy is when we come over into Pox's League than when we were talking earlier about Settlers General. One more thing that needs to be said about the Trickster, there are a couple of targeted nerfs to it. Firstly, there is the Polymath node. Polymath node is going from 3% more damage per mastery type that you've got allocated to 2%. It is keeping its recovery stats. Polymath is still so good that you probably still take it on most Trickster builds, and depending on the exact number of masteries you've got, this is likely a 7 or 8% total nerf to the amount of character damage you deal. Trickster had enough damage on it that this is okay. You can certainly live with this. You are definitely paying a little bit more of a price to be tanky than you used to, but you're still fine. Escape Artist is getting hit a bit harder. Escape Artist is the 2-pointer that gates two of the other options behind it. So it gates the Instant Leech node, and it also gates the Spell Suppression node. It's the one that grants you additional energy shield for your entire character based upon the amount of evasion rating that's on your chest piece, and additional evasion rating for your entire character based upon the amount of energy shield that is found on your helmet. The numbers on both components of this are getting nerfed. However, it's still in a really good spot. The reason I say this is that that notable was balanced around what used to exist in the game prior to 3.25 improving the amount of evasion rating and energy shield that we can get in these particular slots. So 3.25 introduced level 84 bases, you got the necrotic armor, you got the Lich's circlet, and it also buffed quality on armor. These two things together made it so that the Trickster just had so much more energy shield than it could before. On top of this, there's a couple of new options the Trickster could consider, but they probably won't. You probably path pretty close to the cluster that boosts golems on the passive tree as a Trickster. Depends on the exact build you're playing, but a lot of them do. And if you do, then that's something you could consider picking up, because there is a whole bunch of additional defenses that you can get from golems now. However, those golems are fragile. When they die, you then have to resummon them. And as a result, I don't think many people will do that. I just think it's an option that people can keep in mind that you've got. In terms of other skills that were popular during Pox's League, we've already covered the question of Righteous Fire and Lightning Strike. Nova of Frostbolt has been covered. Hexblast is next, Hexblast Mines. So let's just go through the offending text so that you can see exactly what was added a little bit afterwards. And so the theme with Hexblast, when they were designing the skill, they're like, okay, what we want to have is a skill that you can only realistically cast yourself. If you cast it yourself, it's going to have a monumental payoff. However, in order to make the payoff that big, we then need to make it so that you can't realistically trigger it with anything. So they gave it a whole bunch of text that prevented it from being triggered. They were thinking, okay, we don't want this being used with cast on critical strike. We don't want it being used with a whole lot of other things. Instead, it is a slow, methodical cast. What happened? People found that by attaching it to blast chain mines or potentially high impact mines, either or, you ended up being able to completely bypass that mechanic. They're changing it so that you can no longer bypass it. Hexblast now has a 2-second cooldown time with 3 uses. So if you're familiar with the things like Seismic Trap, this is going to work the same way. You are going to build up to 3 uses when you haven't used it for a while, and each one is going to recover over 2 seconds. The base radius is now substantially larger, 3.2 meters. The spell no longer has any mechanics that punish it for being triggered because you've got this maximum number of uses on it. Now it has 150% more damage with hits if the enemy is hexed, previously 100%, and 60% more damage with ailments if the enemy is hexed, previously 40%. So basically, this is one of the hardest hitting skills in the game, but they're making it so that you can't spam it. They're really going out of their way to make sure that you can't spam it. And essentially, I think they may just be going a little bit too conservative on the balancing on this. 2-second cooldown time is really substantial. This is not a slow-paced game like Path of Exile 2. 2 seconds is a long time. Now, if you're playing Hexblast at all, you are probably 6-linking it. And this is the real problem. You can only fit one 6-link skill on most builds. Maybe you can fit in 2, depending upon the exact way your build is set up. So what this means is that you've got your 6-link dedicated to a 2-second cooldown skill. Even though there is that extra couple of uses there, that is still a very long time that it's tied up. If you're not playing this with Ignite, I think that there is just no way to propagate the kills and to make sure that killing one monster with Hexblast actually sets off a chain reaction that can deal with an entire screen. If you are playing it with Ignite, though, even then, I still think 2 seconds is too long. What is 2 seconds in practice? Because, of course, you can get cooldown recovery on gear. The sources that I could think of for cooldown recovery that give you a substantial chunk of it, there is the Shaper Influence Belt mod that can grant you 20%. There is a Crusader Influence Boot mod, and it's also Shaper Influenced. This one is 15%, but there is an elevated version for 20%, so you can get 40% CDR from those two. There is also the unique dual Balance of Terror, which I believe can roll 25%, but that is conditional upon you having manually cast temporal chains in the last 10 seconds. So if you qualify for all of that, you're looking at something like realistically 60% CDR because you probably don't have perfect divine rolls on them. And then at that point, 60% CDR is quite a bit, but it's not like there's much more of it that you can get. So now you're looking at 1.25 seconds. Now, because of some of the funky server maths that exists in Path of Exile 1, there's actually 1.254 seconds that this is going to end up being. That is your cooldown if you manage to get 60% CDR, and if you can't get that 60%, then it's going to blow out by another 33 milliseconds to 1.287 seconds. This, I think, is just too long, even when you've got massive Ignite proliferation. You can get a lot of proliferation with Ignite. It's not like it's quite as dead as this sounds, but I think you're going to really struggle to make this work. Ultimately, I don't really see a home for Hexblast at the moment. If you were going to try and force it, then you would do it with Ignite, but there's just so many barriers in your way. I think I prefer Wave of Conviction Ignite, which is just more reliable. And it's not like Wave of Conviction Ignite has been setting the world on fire lately. It's reasonable, it's not terrible, but I don't think that Hexblast really has that much of a place at the moment. After that, we start looking at some of the other skills that haven't really been affected very much by changes. So we have Flicker Strike, we have Leap Slam, we have Fire Trap, which is again related to Righteous Fire, getting a slight bit of a nerf, but nothing that's overly crushing. And then we have Frostblades of Katabasis. This skill is dead, dead, dead. This has had some massive numerical nerfs, and where I think that some of the other skills that are melee related, like Lightning Strike, Molten Strike of the Zenith, they've been nerfed pretty hard, but they're still functioning. I think Frostblades of Katabasis has probably just been put to sleep by these changes. And then after that, it's a fair way down. Interestingly, Penance Brand of Dissipation didn't get nerfed. That skill is still crazy good. So those are the things that I think are among some of the biggest losers in the patch notes so far, and also some of the top builds from early on in this league that are still perfectly fine to play. Let's look now quickly at some of the things that have me brewing. Now, I'm not going to guarantee any of these end up as really strong setups, but let's start with the Guardian Ascendancy. There's quite a bit going on in here. So, Harmony of Purpose Ascendancy passive has been reworked. It now causes you to gain a random shrine buff every 10 seconds, instead of providing some sort of weird mechanic related to links. And then we have the Unwavering Faith Ascendancy skill, which has been reworked. This now provides 50% reservation efficiency of skills. Now, this is instead of some regeneration bonuses that were previously on that. Now, there's something really interesting the Guardian can do. You have a 4-pointer that causes you to summon elemental relics. These elemental relics can give you the Hatred aura, they can give you the Wrath aura, they can give you the Anger aura. And on top of that, you're playing an Ascendancy that has 50% reservation efficiency of skills, which screams, please use me alongside Spellslinger. Isn't it convenient that Spellslinger received a pretty substantial pair of buffs? So let's start with the big buff. Now has a base mana reservation of 20% at all gem levels, previously 30 to 25% at gem levels 1 to 20. And the small buff, which is the Wand passive mastery that granted unnerved enemies on hits with wands, has now been replaced with a new mastery that provides 25% MRE for skills supported by Spellslinger. Now, you are losing a genuinely good mastery here, so it's not like this is all upside, but you're getting a whole bunch of additional sources of mana reservation efficiency here. And this seems to be a package that wants to be played alongside skills that natively deal physical damage. If it's natively dealing physical damage, you can then convert it to lightning and gain the benefits of the Wrath aura that are going to be provided by your elemental relics, and you can use it alongside the Hatred aura that you're getting from your elemental relics as well. And also, Anger kind of works on everything. On top of that, Wrath is going to grant a whole bunch of extra bonus damage to the initial hit component that you do when you strike an enemy with your wand in order to proc Spellslinger. And we also mentioned earlier when we're talking about the nerfs to Power Siphon and the Power Siphon mine builds, that Power Siphon is getting made to be a faster skill than it used to be. Well, that also works with all of this Guardian package. So I think there's something that could be spicy there. I haven't yet worked out exactly how it would go. I don't know what your payload skills that are attached to Spellslinger would be, but I do think there's at least some potential in this package, but we've got to work out exactly what it is. And then the other thing that's interesting is what's happening to the Elementalist. Now, this is a package of changes that all relate to golems in general. Golems are something that were very popular for, I think it was 2 leagues. I think it was 3.13, 3.14. They were really good at that point. Then they were just really oppressively good as well. They were kind of used everywhere. A whole lot of different builds played them. And eventually, Grinding Gear Games said, you know what, we're going to try and give the Elementalist something new to do. And they took a bunch of the power that was previously in the Elementalist Ascendancy notables that were tied to golems, and they just sort of removed that and gave the Elementalist a few other things. Elementalist was kind of cool for a while, but it never really quite got into a perfect package. Well, what they're doing now is they're changing a bunch of things around in the Elementalist. Fair warning, this is a nerf. Shaper of Flames, the best notable on the Elementalist Ascendancy, although not necessarily the best for every single build. This is the one that encourages you to play an Elementalist that ignites. This one is getting a pretty substantial suite of nerfs to it, but it is also picking up a new skill as well. So it's like it's give with one hand, take with the other, but it is overall weaker. So it's no longer going to have 25% more damage with ignites that you inflict with hits for which the highest damage type is fire. Instead of that power that it used to give, it is going to say that enemies that have been ignited by you, that are presently ignited by you, 40% of their physical damage is going to be converted to fire. This is a substantial defensive layer, but it only works conditionally. You've got to have already applied an Ignite to those enemies. And what this means is that it's fantastic except when it isn't. And that's something you want to keep in mind. All in all, Shaper of Flames is still good if you want to Ignite, especially if you want to Ignite with weird damage types like Chaos damage, or maybe you want to Ignite with cold damage or something like that. Shaper of Flames is still there for you, providing that utility. But very important that you keep in mind that enemy is ignited by you converting their damage to fire. While this is good, the most dangerous monsters are the ones that you haven't hit yet, and those are not going to end up getting any less dangerous because of this particular mod. After that though, there's a number of other changes here. So, firstly, part of the power is in the condensing. 4 points worth of notables at the moment are getting condensed into 2. There is a little bit that's lost here. So Liege of the Primordial and Elementalist are a 4-point cluster that are associated with golems currently, and about 2/3 of their power, maybe about 70% of their combined power, is getting consolidated into just Liege of the Primordial. You can't spec that rest of that power. That rest of that power is lost, but there's plenty more in the Elementalist you probably want to take anyway. Now, there is a new notable that's available that is Herald themed, but I think the big thing here is what we're getting with these golems. So, +2 to the maximum number of summoned golems, previously +1, and summoned golems are immune to elemental damage is now consolidated into Liege of the Primordial, as well as the first 100% increased effect of golem buffs. But it's the golem buffs themselves that are where the power really lies. Summoned Chaos Golem is the first of these. It is getting changed. It is losing something here, but it is definitely going to be ahead. The existing status quo is that your Chaos Golems grant you 5% physical damage reduction. This is being lost. Instead, 17% Chaos Resistance, and on top of that, 10 to 16% damage over time multiplier at gem levels 1 to 20. Now, remember that you're going to potentially have this all tripled because there is a cluster on the character passive tree that's going to grant 100% increased effect of your golem buffs, and there is also 100% increased effect of golem buffs in that first 2-point node that's available for the Elementalist. So, if you elect to summon a Chaos Golem, 51% Chaos Resistance while that golem survives, and 48% unconditional damage over time multiplier. This is strong. Then we have the Flame Golem. Flame Golem is going to grant you 60% increased area of effect, which is great, and 87% increased damage at gem level 20. Again, this is fantastic. Ice Golem, 120% increased critical strike chance, and also 1260 accuracy rating. You probably don't need this on an Elementalist, but there will be some builds that do, and if you're one of them, then it's there for you. Now we have Lightning Golem. Lightning Golem is really, really substantial. 30% increased attack and cast speed, and also 54 flat mana regen per second. This is enormous. There is going to be one thing you need to be aware of though, and that is the potential for your golems to get splattered. If one of your golems goes splat, then that is really going to hurt you quite a lot, especially if it's something like your mana recovery here. If that's your only source of mana recovery, maybe you end up in a little bit of trouble. But this is one of the highest numbers I've seen, especially given that it will be tripled between the Elementalist Ascendancy and that cluster that's on the passive tree. You can also get a little bit more golem effect as well, but that's in cluster jewels and you're probably not going to take that. But now we have the big one. Summon Stone Golem. This still seems to have its flat life recovery. There's nothing indicating in the patch notes that it loses that, but they also have golems grant 60% increased defenses. Again, I am preemptively tripling it because your character is going to be set up to triple it. 60% increased global defenses is a lot. And this is the thing that I think might be necessary to make the Elementalist really work. So, you're going to have a Stone Golem up. When that Stone Golem goes down, you are very squishy for 4 seconds, but you're not actually outright killed. You're just in a squishier state than usual. Then, you got a whole bunch of armor that you've got on your character potentially from other things. That's then going to get scaled up by 60% here, and then you could use Aegis Aurora. That's not the only way that you could build this. There's other things I could think of as well, but this is the one that jumps out to me. So essentially, what we're getting here is a whole package for character defense that is tied to these golems. It's not also just defense. There's also utility that you can spec into. There's other offensive power as well. Remember that you can take 4 of these golems, so you get 1 by default. And then on top of that, you get 2 from the Elementalist 2-pointer that is going to be golem associated. And you're also going to get 1 more from the cluster on the classic passive tree. So there is quite a lot that you can spec into with golems that's looking good. What skill do you want to use? That's the thing that we've got to solve. That is the part that's up in the air. I'm thinking about igniting using Shaper of Flames, but I'm not convinced that that's the only way to go. There is the option of playing a skill that is inherently a physical spell skill, and then using a whole bunch of Herald gems as well, in order to scale it up further. Blade Vortex has been the classic example there, and I do think that potentially Tri or Quad Herald Blade Vortex builds could be back in this patch, but it's not the only way that you could build this. And one last skill I want to mention that is getting a substantial buff is Winter Orb. I personally have never forgiven Winter Orb for being as dominant as it was in patch 3.6. I am still sick of this skill, even though Synthesis League was a long time ago. That said, it's definitely picking up a lot of additional power here. And I wanted to finish with one final buff that's taking place that I think is really worth your while having on your radar. There is a streamer by the name of Tatantial who has very frequently played in hardcore Burst Totems on the Hierophant. This build is losing absolutely nothing in this patch. It was already good, and it's just getting miles better. Stormburst is now going to cast 5 times for every 4 times that it used to cast in the past. That is a substantial buff to the amount of damage this skill does, and everything about it was working fine in the past. So Tatantial's Stormburst build is one of the winners out of this patch. The Elementalist Ascendancy is definitely another winner, but working out exactly what to do with it isn't clear yet. And the Guardian Ascendancy is another winner, but that is something that, again, is going to require a whole bunch of thinking in order to make it work. My first thought is Spellslinger, but I do think there's other things that could potentially be explored there. In terms of the big losers, definitely Power Siphon Locus Mines has been taken down a peg. Existing Trickster-based Lightning Strike builds are dead, but there are builds that will still be Tricksters, will still be Lightning Strike, but they will not be the combinations of items that have been used in the past. Those will survive, just not the shells that we're used to. There will be Slayer Lightning Strike, it will survive. There will be Molten Strike of the Zenith will survive. Classic Molten Strike will probably survive as well, but all of those skills are definitely feeling a bit worse than they were in 3.24, but they should still be completely fine skills to play. Otherwise though, Hexblast Mines, it's dead, Dave. It is absolutely dead, Dave. And Frostblades of Katabasis is probably dead, Dave, as well. Nova of Frostbolt, I think the people who have played that in the past are going to shift over to Ball Lightning of Orbiting. It's slightly worse in 3.25, but in 3.26, that Ball Lightning of Orbiting Archmage build will still be fine, but the other versions of it that were around Nova of Frostbolts, they're going to be much worse if they're playable at all. I'm going to leave it there. May your Varlobs have interesting results. Please don't use one on your League Start build plans.